Oi, whether it's old or it's new, it exists, which is worth a look. And today we're going to look at which one is better, the rival Kronos or the Mega Magnus. Now looking at these two pistols, they're basically the same, only serving a different ammo type. However, just looking at them, if you don't believe yet, you load from the top, you prime from the top, and there's an internal magazine. Not too many Nerf guns have internal magazines. But guess what? They're both that same way. Now this one has a little door flap, so it's the only real difference between the two, but I think you get the idea. I've been able to run both of these in a war. One in the last war that I did with a much smaller group, and also I got to run this in my March and May war, where I got a decent amount of usage out of this, plus several tags, and same thing here. Now last month I got to use both in the same game, which actually was really good for comparing the two. Now originally it makes sense to say that the Kronos is obviously better. It's slightly smaller, and it also has a higher capacity, plus range and accuracy. But that was until these things came out. And after getting used the Mega Magnus with AccuFakes, it actually looks like there's a chance that it might be competitive against this much more popular and much more new alternative. Now right off the bat, looking at the ergonomics of the blasters, I really don't like the handle for the Mega Magnus. It's a little bit small for my taste, and it kind of irks me for it being that way. Then you get to the top priming handle, while it's really comfortable actually to pull it back, and it looks freaking cool. It is rather massive to prime the entire top of a blaster. And when you look at the Kronos, it's only the back half that you actually have to prime. However, it does have this stupid access door, which, while it looks good with it, it actually slows down the reloading process and can be a bit of a nuisance. Then there's this little tack rail that I don't even know why it's on there. It's kind of useless in my opinion. But then you come to the grip. The grip is so much more comfortable in this thing. It's meant for a bigger hand size, and I like a nice, fat, beefy grip to hold when I'm firing a blaster. When you're talking about priming these things, though, this one that I got, I don't know if it's just mine, but sometimes when I have to prime it, I actually have to force it, because when I first got out of the box, it would not fire whatsoever. I ended up having to remove the locks the very first hour that I had it. So that's a bit of a pain. I don't know if anybody else has that issue, but it can get a little chunky when pulling back, when trying to prime it. Whereas the Magnus, it doesn't really have that issue. It's easy to prime. I mean, sure, it's a hefty spring, but that doesn't really kill it. It's just the priming on this is a lot smoother to do, while it does have a much larger priming hand. And when it comes to the capacity, the big up for the Kronos itself is the fact that it can hold 5 shots versus the Magnus is 3. 3 shots doesn't last very long. It's one of those things where 3 shots is just 2 shots too little. 5 you can manage with, but 3 is kind of a nuisance to work with. Whereas 5, for a pistol, it's just low enough that it's okay. You see a lot of weapons like the Spectre, or its many reskins that are 5-shot revolvers or the hammer shots, where 5 shots is okay, but it's not like the best. It's just enough to work with, to make it actually usable in a Nerf war without having to worry about getting shot in the back. And when it comes to when you're trying to store a weapon on your body as a secondary, that's when you come into a bit of an issue. Now the Kronos is easy. It's about the same size as the Maverick, so I use my same exact holster with it. But then when you come to something like the Magnus, it's a little bit bigger, and it's a little more obnoxious trying to holster it. It's not a major difference in size, but the thing is, even the little difference can make a big difference in the end. So I ended up using my basic duct tape holster for the Maverick, although I have to make a new one for the Magnus because I ended up using one for my stockade. And if you know how big a stockade is, that's not a small blaster. So using the Mega Magnus and that, it was kind of it gave a bit of perspective as to how large it actually is. Another thing other than just comfort and ergonomics is how effective it is in combat. First things first is how easy it is to reload. The Magnus is not as easy to reload as the Kronos. The Kronos is really easy and really quick to load those 5 darts, whereas with the Magnus, it's more like you have to kind of push it down. You have to make sure it gets in. It's not like you can just push it down and it's good. It takes a little more effort to make it work. Plus there's also the fact that you can push a dart too far back and it won't go down into the mag. I've done that a few times, and while it doesn't necessarily jam, it makes it hard to make it function correctly, and you end up destroying darts. And in a war situation, you don't really have the luxury of being able to make things work as smoothly as possible, so as little problems as possible is what you need. Now, neither one of these guns were really bad with jamming. They're a very basic, small blaster, so if they have a jamming problem, you have a bigger issue, and you shouldn't be using that as a weapon in a war. The one more quick thing I wanted to note with the Kronos in this for performance is that you can actually kind of shotgun it. While it's not very good at shotgunning, you can do it. And the way of shotgunning it is simply hold down the trigger when it's back, pull back, hold down the trigger again, and then finally prime it. You can shoot up to 5, although it doesn't really have much power past 2, so I wouldn't really suggest it. And on top of that, only 1 really goes very far, so you'd have to figure out how to make it really usable. If you have to shoot like a zombie up close that takes 2 tags to get him out, then it's probably good to use it in that regard on occasion. Sure, that's everything else about how it performs, but how do they fire? Now, both of these Nerf guns are stock, so comparing them in firing in distance and accuracy, it basically comes out to what you'd expect out of the box. This does have a removed lock, like I mentioned before. However, that doesn't change performance as a whole, because it only affects me holding down the trigger when it's back. So that doesn't change anything. I did take these outside and test them on top of having my war experience already with them. I gotta say, when I first used the Kronos, I was kind of thrown back by how accurate it was in comparison to using your regular Nerf Elite standard ammos. Now, it does have a bit of an issue with the hop-up. The darts... Oh, I keep saying darts. The rival rounds can veer off a bit, which at times is not at all ideal. And my friend ended up using one with an Apollo spring in it, which actually made them fly kind of erratically. Whenever he aimed for what he was saying, the torso, he would end up hitting them in the face. And I got hit several times in the face, or the back of the head, because the hop-up took those rival rounds right into my head. Which was kind of a pain, as you would imagine. But then when you compare it to using the Magnus with its original ammo, the standard Nerf ammo, or I don't even know if the light take stuff really works that well on a Magnus. I never used their original third-party ammo, so I can't say for sure how that goes. Oh my goodness, you couldn't shoot the side of a barn. Tried shooting a target at 25 feet away. I couldn't even hit it unless I got extremely lucky. That in itself says how bad the original Mega ammo is. It shoots really far and it can float quite a distance, but oh my goodness, you can't shoot anything with it at range. You have no chance of hitting something. However, once I got to use the AccuFakes, which actually was my first ammo using with it, it changed everything about how it behaves. Sure, you get a major drop in distance. It doesn't shoot nearly as far, but at the same time, you could still clear probably about 60 feet easy, and it would still be able to hit a target at a relatively high height, and not even at a full angle. So that was something to keep in mind. It still has plenty of range. The fact is, if a laser had drop, these things would be comparable to a laser. I was pointing this thing across the sanctuary of my knockback wars, and I was shooting it, and it would go in the exact path. No horizontal change from where I was aiming. It was exactly where I wanted it, side by side. It would hit it there. It just wouldn't hit the right height because I wasn't used to the drop yet. But I could definitely snipe somebody with enough practice with it in order to understand exactly how far each shot would probably go. So I shot 15 rounds of the rival ammo in the Kronos, 15 shots of the Mega AccuFakes, and 15 shots from the regular Nerf Elite Mega ammo. And there was definitely a much better accuracy on the Mega AccuFakes than there was the original Megas, and also the rival ammo. Now, I will say that there was a bit of an error in it, at the fact there was a light wind, but it wasn't really enough to say that it was making my shots really out there. The only issue I ever had at that point with more wind was when I was using the regular Mega ammo, in which case it doesn't matter anyway. I was never going to hit the target. Forget the few times I hit it. I was never going to really hit the target without too much of an issue. You know what I mean. So after getting the performance test and how well they fire, I actually gotta say, I'd give the Mega Magnus the upper hand. Sure, the Kronos shoots further, but range isn't everything when you still can't hit where you're shooting at. The problem with firing the Mega Magnus with AccuFakes is that it was really, really slow. It was actually really easy for them to dodge it, although if you had a little more power out of it, that would not be as easy to dodge. And if it still kept that same accuracy, you're shooting lasers and they're not escaping it. But I've never had that with the Kronos. I never was able to exact fire at a target where I knew exactly where the rival round was going to hit. But then coming to the last point where the Kronos definitely has an upper hand is in all of the aftermarket support. Now I will link what I found for the Magnus in this video because there is so little that you can find. The things I found was somebody who did a slam fire mod, although you could not use the original trigger. It was basically inoperative in comparison to what it used to be. Popular alterations to the Mega Magnus is a pump kit, or doing a larger magazine so that way you can hold more than just 3 darts. Which does definitely increase the capacity and makes it a lot more viable. The only problem is it's harder to holster as a secondary, considering the mag will stick out of the bottom of the blaster. And that means you're losing the similar profile you can compare these two with. Megas also tend to get re-barreled for elite darts, so if you're using a Magnus, you might hear somebody did that, or there might be a kit for them. I found a video on a kit from, I think, last year. However, there's no link in the description. There's no details about it. So if you're going to find one, I don't know where to find it myself. Hopefully there is one out there for those who want to use a Mega Magnus with elites. You could probably get a higher capacity, and it'd be definitely a much, much longer range weapon if you could hit the target. Well, one thing I really want to link is Wacom's integration, where he took 2 of these, put them side by side, put sling fire stock on it, and made it lever action or pump action or something like that. That was something that was really cool, and I gotta say, I really enjoyed it. Also, another thing that tends to happen to these is turning him into a master key. I'm not really sure why. Drac has a video on it, and I'm sure other people have done it as well, and I also have a friend who wants to do it himself. But they want to master key these things. I don't really see the point in doing that. I don't think it's really viable for Master Key. It would be such a large gun to underbarrel. But each to their own. I appreciate that you're still doing something in the nerfing hobby. So hats off to you. However, there is no comparison in the two when it comes to support. Because this little pistol, being newer and so very popular, replacing your typical hammer shot as probably the most popular nerf secondary now, it has more support than you could ever ask for. One thing with the rival weapons, because they have a higher FPS cap, is the fact that these things have a larger plunger. A larger plunger to the hammer shot, to strong arms, which means that people will do crazier and crazier mods. Plus, there's also the fact that you can definitely fit a K26. That's been done many times already. However, it might make it kind of worthless to use it because you can't shoot the side of a barn with it. Just look at Brad Phillips' video. One issue with this in the K26 is, as I've seen, it gets a little hard to actually hit a target with it with the K26. It can hold a K26. Doesn't mean it's good with the K26. However, somebody probably has figured out how to make it more accurate. And another thing that I've seen is, if you haven't seen it already, turning this into a Stefan pump action pistol with a long brass barrel in order to make it an absolute sniper rifle. There's just so much you can do with this thing, and there's so much aftermarket support on this blaster. Now, if you're new to the Nerf community, there's plenty of different holstering rigs and setups and priming handles and the whole 9 yards with this pistol that I don't even need to link any in the description. All you need to do is look it up, and you'll be able to find it. Things that I'd probably look up is the K26 Kronos Stefan conversion, or as they call them now, half-length dart conversion. Stuff like that you'll definitely find a lot of. There's no shortage of Kronos modifications that the Magnus never had. Now, in conclusion, which one is better? Which one would I prefer to use in a war? Coming down to the bottom line between the two, I think they both fit different categories for a secondary pistol. Whereas the Kronos is a lot better and definitely the king in close quarters. The problem is longer range, it kind of loses accuracy to an extent. Now, if you're going against people who are using regular Nerf Elite ammo or standard types, nothing half-length or nothing really modified, in a stock class war, this would be amazing. However, rival rounds do have a tendency to float off target, even when it's really accurate at close quarters. So Indoor Wars is a definite beast, I will say that. I'd have to say hands down when you're talking about range, especially with the AccuFakes, the Magnus takes the win. But definitely not your go-to for a fight. It having only 3 rounds, it can be a lot of downtime that you're not shooting your enemies, and a lot of time that you might just get tagged out yourself. So keeping in mind that this is something that you can use to snipe an enemy. At the end of the day, I'd probably still choose the Kronos myself. I'd say if I had 4 shots with a Mega Magnus, I'd probably make it a definite winner. That ammo count does make me say I'd still prefer my Kronos. But either way, I enjoy both blasters now, and I really have a new perspective on how much I enjoy Megas. Even so, 2 out of 5 times, I'd probably choose the Mega Magnus, especially with the usage of the Mega AccuFakes. They really changed the game for a Mega Nerf gun. And that's why I really wanted to make this video and really want you to appreciate how much more competitive it makes the Nerf gun. With a little more power, it would definitely be a monster to be reckoned with. It isn't on the same FPS par, for sure, but if you could get 100 FPS out of a Mega Magnus with AccuFakes, you'd probably be more threatened by a Mega Magnus than a Kronos, especially at range. With all of that in mind, choose your weapon wisely.